Hi, my name's Steve Greystock. I'm Senior Program at the Toronto International Film Festival, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A following Oscar Peterson, Black and White, and of course to welcome the director, writer of the film, Barry Avrich. So applaud digitally, or hey, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Congrats on the film. What do you maybe want to? Perhaps we could start with you talking about what led you to your interest in Oscar Peterson and the making of the film. Did you?
Well, I never dreamed growing up in Montreal in a small, horribly wood-paneled basement where my parents kept their 6 prized record albums, their LPs, and it was Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Oscar Peterson. I never dreamed, decades later I'd be making a film about him, but that's what it was. It wasn't that they were huge jazz lovers. They loved music and they loved live music. And whenever my mother could, she would take me to the Place des Arts in Montreal, and I would see great artists, whether it be Pearl Bailey and Hello Dolly, unbelievable, or Nana Muscuri, I didn't even know what that meant then, and including Oscar Peterson, who I really at that time didn't even appreciate the fact that he was from Montreal. But fast forward, after making the David Foster documentary, I really wanted to do something in the music world again. I wanted jazz. I had fallen in love with jazz in the 70s. And I went to Randy Lennox, who used to run Universal and who was at Bell at the time, with the idea. And Jeffrey Latimer, who had given him a star in Canada's Walk of Fame, I said, how about this? And Randy said, absolutely. And so the interesting thing, Steve, 7 months later, we have a film. I've never made a film this fast during COVID in my life, and may it be the last under this time constraint, but here it is.
Cool. Did you, when you said you got interested in jazz in the 70s, was it Peterson? Was there other performers?
It was, I had a cousin in Toronto, and so I would come and visit him, and he would take me down to Yonge Street, the record stores of Yonge Street in the 70s, amongst other things, and he turned me on to Chuck Mingus, Maynard Ferguson, Coltrane, Miles. Yeah, well, a couple of Canadians with Dave Brubeck. And so I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was listening to Styx and Dire Straits and Boston at the time, and Led Zeppelin like everybody else. And so this other world of jazz, and he would make me listen to his incredible record player that he had at the time, and listen to that music. And I just got so hooked on it and never forgot it. And ironically, my father, who was on the road his whole life, would run into Maynard Ferguson and Dave Brubeck and some of the other Canadians. And so we would have these strange interactions on holidays with them. And I ended up seeing Maynard Ferguson, I think, in the last couple of years of his life in Washington perform. And so I'm hooked for life. And Oscar, I had never seen Oscar live other than as a child several times in Montreal. So this is to get lost in the music again. My producing partner, Mark Selby, who's a pianist, really helped get me up to speed and introduced me to a whole bunch of compositions I had never heard, so it was just a great opportunity to make the film.
Did you find when you started the film, I mean, Peterson was, he was a huge figure, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, he was on TV, Canadian TV, but American TV, internationally, traveled everywhere. And he performed with some of those albums he made in the 50s and 60s with people like Roy Eldridge and Lester Young, or, stellar works. And they, in fact, with Eldridge, I think it sort of reinvigorated his career. It made him known again, and people, brought him back to the fore. But did you find that that people had, what was the awareness of Peterson when you started making the film?
Well, amongst Canadians, yes. Amongst the music community, sure. I mean, when I'm going to sort of pitch the film internationally, there's certain markets that get it, certain ones don't. know him. I think primarily because no drama, really. I mean, this isn't Miles, and it's not. There's no tantrums. There's no drugs. It's not Finding Neverland. There's no heavy drama here. But there's incredible musicmanship, and the discography is so insane. Aside from his own compositions, as you alluded to, people that he played with, everybody had to have him on their album. He was sort of the go-to guy. And as he says in the film right at the beginning, which was going to be a title at one point for me, I came to play. I mean, that's what drove him. That's what his drug was, those 88 keys. And so, now everybody's sort of, as those that have seen the film from an industry perspective are going, oh my God, when I first pitched the film internationally, it was like, well, I don't know, Oscar, and then they watch it and they go, oh my God, and certainly the great people that we have in the film who pay tribute to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's quite the roster of Quincy Jones, Billy Joel, a wide range of people. Were you surprised? I mean, it was a bit of a surprise to me that, I mean, Billy Joel's a pianist too, but it was a bit of a surprise that he was such a big fan.
Huge. I mean, I think if you're a pianist and you've studied that craft, and Billy Joel is so good, then you cannot not trace your roots back to Oscar and that those machines of his. I mean, they all. I mean, I would have had Chick Corea, and sadly he passed, and that was our plan. But I think everybody who I approached, it wasn't even a question. They got in line and they were great, and Herbie and I think Herbie and Ramsey Lewis, I think legends, right? And Dave Young in the film, who played with Oscar, to have him in the film playing Oscar's tunes again, magic for me. But I think what it says to Steve, and you alluded to this earlier about Roy Eldridge and some of the people that he played with, Herb Ellis, that his generosity was so enormous. It wasn't the spotlight on him. And these they talk about that in the film at length. I spent a lot of time. I worried about this in terms of the composition of a trio and what made it work, and that he understood the role of everybody. They understood where he came in, where they came in, but he was just such a generous musician. There was, the ego, of course he had an ego, but it wasn't about, these guys are truly sidemen. They're more than that. And they just work so well on the road together. He had a good time.
Yeah, I think one of the most touching moments in the film is when he talks about the impact that all the travel had on his marriages. I mean, to me, that's the drama, and it's sort of sublimated through a lot of his career. But I mean, it comes to the fore in that, and there's that. I think that it was in the interview, I think, on the CBC, where he talked about, that he'd, it had taken a toll.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, that when you talk about the composition of the film, I really wanted it to be in his words. I mean, who am I to tell the story of Oscar Peterson? But if I can let him tell his own story, and that's why we spent, thousands and thousands and thousands of hours combing the earth, not only in our own country in Canada, but interviews in Copenhagen, David Frost, Dick Cavett, whoever we can find in any part of the world that let him tell his story through every echelon, every challenge, every era, was critical for me to see him change as a musician and see him change in life, even going through the difficult times of being on the road, whether it be through the South, whether it be, his marriages, and at the end with his stroke. I wanted people to see that evolution of his life through his words, not mine.
Right. You must have had some, it must have been a lot of fun to sort of get to find that material. What was the sort of biggest surprise, the strangest spot you got an interview for him? I mean, he like you said, huge, like TV hosts like Frost and Cavett, and who talked to him and were, kind of.
There's some fun moments. I mean, those that pay tribute to him in the film, Elaine Stritch, who makes an appearance and loves him. And of course, she was a great singer and performer herself. And I didn't know that connection. And as you know, we had Elaine Stritch a couple of years back for another one of my docs in the building. It'll never be the same. And so it was fun to see her, but certainly interviews from Japan and Copenhagen, where, you know, both Denmark and Japan love their jazz. So I'm looking forward to them seeing this. I mean, that last concert in Vienna, just seeing how much he loved performing. This was a man that did not, pull his punches when he was performing or go through the motions. I mean, he truly loved it. So, and you get that. I mean, it was very tough in the amount of time that we had to get it all in. And I will say too, Steve, which I think is important for your audience, what I wanted to do with this film is, you know, call it a docu-concert. I didn't want it to just be purely biographical. And I was inspired by Standing in the Shadows of Motown that I saw at the Uptown Theater. And when the audience had those music breaks with the Funk Brothers, wow. And then 20 Feet from Stardom, you know, when they have Jagger listen to I forget the song already, but when they have the playback from the music, I wanted the audience to hear contemporary musicians playing it as well as Oscar playing it. And at the same time, you know, the directions to the editor, Nicholas Kleinman, who's a genius on this film because there's so much footage, was that freight train. I want a freight train. I want a night train, freight train. I want a night freight train, whatever it is, going through this film 100 miles an hour. And he would show me cuts where it was so much Oscar. I'd go, oh my God, it's too much, too fast. He goes, you wanted a freight train? I said, I know, but there's so much. And he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, there's that great quote. I think it's Ramsey Lewis about how Oscar was Peterson was so adept technically that he just terrified people because his skills were so top notch.
Precision. I mean, you know, I can't. I mean, it's my greatest regret in life is not being able to play a piano, but you know, just to sort of be able to sit down and I think I can't remember. I think it is Ramsey or maybe it's Branford Marsalis to be able for all those, you know, those fingers to play all 88 keys and own them all. Incredible. Now, you know, and that's why I wanted Branford. I wanted John Baptiste in there too, on that end of it. They're such great musicians themselves, and they owe their lives to Oscar.
And I mean, you know, when you talk about you mentioned his generosity. I mean, you can see it in the people he mentored and in some of the performances, like, you know, with it's Love Bow that's played it close to the end, which is quite touching.
Yes. And I mean, Robbie Botosh, who was one of his proteges who's in the film, there's many that, you know, Oscar loved to teach that are there as well. So, you know, that certainly comes across in terms of his legacy of musicians. And also, I mean, it didn't make it in the film. We just didn't have any time, but, you know, for Canadian film fans, the only film score he ever did, was asked to do, was Silent Partner, with Chris Plummer and, you know, and John Candy's first part, and that wild film.
A Garth Drabinsky production.
Garth Drabinsky, Joel Michaels production. Absolutely. And I love it. I love it. Joel and I are trying to figure out how to remake it, but that Oscar score was absolutely beautiful in there.
Oh yeah. And I mean, that's one of the best, Canadian noirs ever made, for sure.
That's right.
I think it's quite appropriate that he did the music to that. I also, you mentioned I mean, you really sense his dedication to performance when he fights to come back after the stroke. I thought that was a serious, you know, it really shows how much he loved the audience and loved the music.
Most would give up. And just say, if I can't play it 100%, I'm not playing. But he got interested and curious with computers and technology and whatnot, but ultimately still went back to the piano and played. And, you know, there are those in the film that say that they saw him playing at the Blue Note after the stroke, and he can tear up the piano. And he still could. I mean, you'd have to really know that one hand wasn't working at 100%.
Yeah. Well, I think that's because he was playing at 125% before.
You're probably right. I mean, it's amazing that if you watch him through his through all of the stages of his life, that, one would think that with age, you slow down, and not him. I mean, he attacked at those ivories like nobody's business. And you see it even early in the film when he's 15 years old playing Boogie Woogie. I mean, just insane.
Yeah. He's a crazy player. One of the things that I did know, I knew a lot of Oscar's records. My brothers used to cut his lawn because my dad had a landscaping company, so it felt kind of close to home. But I mean, you bring up the the fact that he, that one of his compositions was played at Obama's inauguration, and like his involvement with civil rights, which obviously the racism that jazz musicians, I think in particular, face was pretty quite vicious. A lot of people, a lot of jazz musicians moved to France, or they stopped touring. They wouldn't tour with bands that were fronted by, Roy Eldridge played with Artie Shaw, and then I think Gene Krupa, and then he stopped because the animosity and the racism was so intense. So I really appreciate you bringing up Oscar's involvement with that. I wasn't aware of it.
Well, I mean, you knew that there was, we'd heard these stories, and you knew that there was, huge racism in the United States. And it continues to be that awful. However, I think until we all saw Green Book, and which I saw, at the Toronto Film Festival in Roy Thompson Hall, dragged a friend who didn't really want to see it, didn't know anything about it. And that ended up becoming the sleeper of the festival, and won the Oscar. That those moments to me were eye-opening and earth-shattering, because it really dealt with the situation in extraordinary detail. Because we've seen footage for years, but not necessarily how it impacted the musician in a macro level. Right. And then when one of our historians in the film pointed out to me that Obama had chosen Hymn to Freedom for, I believe, his second inauguration, when the world was already changing, and changing in a bad way, and he chose that song to send a message to me, it wasn't even a question that when we were building that very powerful act in the film, that we'd have to include the footage that Oscar would obviously react to today and was writing about even then, on that. What has changed? And so it wasn't even a question that footage had to go in, because he'd make the same call.
Well, I thanks so much for the film. It's a beautiful tribute to an amazing musician, and congrats.
Well, Steve, thank you, and thrilled to be back at the best film festival in the world.
Cool. We're glad to be back, and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks.